Long before a unified state existed, the Nile Valley was home to a tangled web of regional societies. This natural division was reflected in the culture, religion, and politics of the local population. Narmer united a fragmented territory and founded a civilization rooted in Africa. Kemet, as the Egyptians themselves called their land, was African in its geography, its people, and its worldview. As people reclaim their African roots, Narmer becomes a symbol of pride, resistance, and ancestry. Stay with us to learn a little more about the history of this great pharaoh. Global myths. Between myths and memories, another journey begins. The founding of Kemet under Narmer took place within a wider Africa, already connected by trade routes and shared spiritual and cultural practices. Before unification, each region had its own leaders, all rivals for territory, resources, and prestige. City-states developed independently, each with its own beliefs and social practices. Upper Egypt was known for its warrior leaders and gods such as Set. Lower Egypt worshipped deities such as Wadjet, the cobra goddess who protected the delta. Rivalry between the two kept tensions constantly high. The differences went beyond geography or religion. Iconography also distinguished the two kingdoms. Upper Egypt wore the tall white conical crown known as the hedjet. Lower Egypt wore the red deshret, flat-shaped with a front projection. These crowns were more than royal ornaments. They marked cultural identity and territorial power, and wearing one or the other signaled which worldview a ruler claimed. Political fragmentation did not prevent a sophisticated material culture from taking shape. Excavations have revealed elaborate tombs, finely crafted stone tools, and active trade with neighboring regions. Ideas and goods moved freely through the Nile Valley. But all that energy remained scattered. Narmer emerges in this scene of fragmentation and ferment, not yet as pharaoh, but as leader of one of the proto-states of Upper Egypt. His rise coincides with a period when disputes between the kingdoms were intensifying, and the drive toward political centralization was gaining strength. Local wars were no longer only about territory. They were about who would hold symbolic and spiritual control of the Nile Valley. Narmer's origins, according to one academic hypothesis, likely trace back to the city of Thinis, where he would have inherited both a warrior tradition and a strategic mind. Rather than simply crushing his rivals, he seems to have understood that unification required more than brute force. It required a new narrative, an identity that crossed regional boundaries. That set him apart from the other local chiefs of his time. Narmer was not the first to attempt centralization. Chiefs such as Scorpion II and Ka had already taken concrete steps in that direction, conquering cities and forging alliances. But it was Narmer who carried the project forward, weaving symbolic, religious, and military elements into a single project of unity. The complexity of pre-dynastic Egypt also appears in the archaeological record. Rock paintings at Gebel el-Silsila and tombs at Abydos depict scenes of battle, religious processions, and offerings to the gods. They suggest that unification happened gradually, through negotiations, conflicts, and cultural fusions. Narmer inherited this legacy and transformed it into a foundation. Understanding this pre-unification landscape helps us grasp the scale of what Narmer achieved. His feat was not only political, it was civilizational. Uniting Upper and Lower Egypt meant uniting worlds, physical, symbolic, and divine, into a single body that would come to be known as Kemet, the Black Land, cradle of eternity. Around 3100 BC, Narmer united the two lands under a single crown, and the Narmer palette, found at Hierakonpolis, records that moment. On one side, he wears the crown of Upper Egypt and subdues his enemies. On the other, he wears the crown of Lower Egypt and leads ceremonial processions. Many Egyptologists read the piece as a ritual and ideological record of unification, not necessarily the literal description of a single decisive battle. But the historical outcome is the same, the birth of Kemet as a centralized state. To seal this union, Narmer married Nithotep, Princess of Nakada, symbolically binding the two halves of the country into a single lineage. Centuries later, in 1897, archaeologists found Nithotep's tomb, so richly built that many scholars today believe she may have ruled alone after her husband's death. Narmer also founded a capital at Memphis, situated exactly between Upper and Lower Egypt, which became the new state's administrative and spiritual center. There, scribes, priests, and counselors built a system of records, taxation, and grain distribution that would sustain Egypt for millennia. Rather than erasing local traditions, Narmer incorporated regional gods into the national pantheon and turned local leaders into administrators of the new kingdom, a policy of inclusion that secured the loyalty of newly conquered populations. Under his command, Egypt expanded its borders to Canaan and to Nubia, consolidated cities through major construction projects, and formalized religious symbols that would run through all of Egyptian history. The Djed, pillar of stability, and the Ankh, symbol of eternal life. The Egyptians saw the pharaoh as an extension of the land, the river, and the ancestors. And in taking on that role, Narmer carried both political power and a spiritual lineage rooted in African soil. Egypt's relationship with Nubia deserves special attention. Egypt and Nubia exchanged goods, ideas, and aesthetic traits for generations, and some researchers raise the hypothesis that Narmer's ancestors may have come from that region, though this remains a debated reading within the academic literature. Sources on Narmer's own reign remain scarce and difficult to interpret. Even his identity, possibly merged with the figure of Menes in later records, still generates discussion among Egyptologists. But most scholars agree on one point. Narmer did not just build a kingdom. He established the archetype of the ideal sovereign that would shape every pharaoh after him. And in doing so, he did not break from Africa. He consolidated it. For the ancient Egyptians, Maat was the heart of existence. More than a goddess, she was the cosmic principle of order, justice, and harmony, the force that held everything in balance, from the movement of the stars to the decisions of a tribunal. In this system, the pharaoh was not merely a political or military leader, but the chief guardian of Maat on earth. Narmer was the first to formally take on that role. By unifying Upper and Lower Egypt, Narmer was founding a state and restoring primordial order. For the Egyptians, chaos or Isfet was a constant threat, and political disorder meant cosmic imbalance. People read Narmer's victory as a triumph of Maat over chaos. He was a restorer of universal harmony. This relationship between the pharaoh and Maat carried real spiritual weight. The ruler had to guarantee peace, truth, justice, and balance throughout society. The Egyptians attributed the smooth functioning of temples, justice in the courts, the distribution of resources, and even the regularity of the Nile floods to the presence of Maat, and by extension, to the pharaoh's virtue. The image of Narmer as guardian of order also appears in his royal titles. The Serek, the frame around his name associated with a palace, and the god Heru reinforced his divine legitimacy. Heru, the falcon god, represented celestial power and vigilance. Narmer, then, was Heru incarnate, tasked with upholding Maat in every corner of Kemet. In the temples, priests invoked Narmer in rituals that marked the renewal of order. Royal festivals such as the Hebsed, which tested the pharaoh's vitality and justice, served as public proof that he was capable of upholding Maat. Religion and politics were inseparable. A failure of governance revealed both an administrative and a spiritual crisis. Maat also appeared in architecture and art. The symmetry of the temples, the proportions of the statues, the regularity of the hieroglyphs, all of it was a visible expression of the same principle. Physical order mirrored spiritual order. Under Narmer, this aesthetic of balance began to take shape, and it would shape how the Egyptians saw the world and themselves for millennia. Legal justice was another pillar of Maat. Narmer established judges and counselors to apply the law fairly. The scale, a symbol associated with Maat, represented this ideal of equity. Every judicial decision aimed to keep the world in harmony, mirroring the cosmic balance upheld by the pharaoh. This ideal extended even into the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that when a person died, their heart was weighed against the feather of Maat, A light heart meant the spirit was accepted into the afterlife. This judgment mirrored the pharaoh's role in life, ensuring that people lived according to truth and justice, the same standard his own leadership had to meet. Narmer, then, was the first to embody this model of kingship. His alliance with Maat was the foundation of his legitimacy, his rule, and how he would be remembered. He turned order into a divine principle. This fusion of politics and spirituality gave ancient Egypt its extraordinary cohesion and its long duration. With Narmer, kingship stopped being merely an office and became a priesthood as well. The pharaoh was now the mediator between men and gods, the pillar between heaven and earth, the human face of Maat, the standard by which every later king would be measured. Narmer's impact was not limited to his own generation. His reign laid the institutional, cultural, and symbolic foundations that would shape pharaonic Egypt for millennia. With the founding of the first dynasty, what we now call the Thinite period was inaugurated, a new state organization that made the pharaoh the supreme authority, political, religious, administrative, and cosmic, all at once. Narmer was the last king of the Predynastic period. By founding the capital at Memphis, he secured control over the country. Choosing Memphis as capital was no random gesture. Situated between Upper and Lower Egypt, on the banks of the Nile, the city represented union and balance between the two worlds. It became the country's main political and religious center for centuries. Narmer was also a pioneer in the practice of immortalizing his image and his deeds in monuments, artifacts, and inscriptions. The Narmer Palette is the most famous example, but it is only the beginning of a tradition that later pharaohs would expand. The monumentality of Egyptian art has roots in that same need, to fix royal authority in time and space. The visual style of his era, symmetrical figures, a clear hierarchy of scale, narrative fused with symbolism, would shape all the Egyptian iconography that followed. The pose of the pharaoh striking down his enemies, the double crown, the falcon god Heru at his side, all of this would become standard in royal depictions. Narmer shaped the pharaonic style itself. Politically, he laid the groundwork for a centralized bureaucracy. Local governors, the nomarchs, came to answer to the central power, and this hierarchy allowed the state to control vast agricultural areas, collect taxes, and manage resources such as grain, cattle, and metals. This system also allowed religious practice to expand. With centralization, cults grew around important deities such as Heru, Wsir, and Aset. Temples gained importance and became centers of economic, cultural, and spiritual power. All of this traces back to Narmer's understanding that the sacred had a real role to play in governance. His legacy also shows up in diplomacy. Evidence of contact with Nubia and the Levant, suggesting that Egypt, already under Narmer, looked beyond its own borders, brought cultural and economic exchanges that helped enrich the young empire. Narmer opened the first paths of Egyptian foreign policy. Funerary practices also changed. Narmer's tomb at Abydos was one of the first to feature monumental characteristics, with wooden burial chambers and decorated panels. This tradition would grow, leading over time to the pyramids of the Old Kingdom. The Egyptian idea of eternity began to take physical shape during his reign. Another part of his legacy is a unified Egyptian identity. Before Narmer, the inhabitants of the Nile Valley saw themselves as members of a city or region. After unification, a sense of belonging to something larger emerged. The people of Kemet, children of the Nile, subjects of the divine pharaoh. Language, religion, and administration worked together to keep that identity strong. He is an archetype, the model of the founder, the leader who turns chaos into order, the visionary who sees the path of civilization before anyone else. He didn't need pyramids to be remembered. His work was etched into the very existence of Kemet, and Egyptian time would come to be counted from his reign. In founding a kingdom, Narmer founded a civilizational landmark. Under his leadership, Kemet became the first great proof that Africa is the cradle of civilizations. His story reminds us that Africa was not only colonized, it also created empires, philosophical systems, science, art, and spiritual traditions. That is why his name still matters. He represents the idea that power can live in harmony with the sacred, that governance can express cosmic order, and that a people flourish when they know their roots. Because history does not end. It continues wherever consciousness awakens. Global myths. Between myths and memories, another journey begins. Thank you for joining this journey until the end. If you enjoy myths, legends, and stories that have traveled across centuries, explore the playlists and other videos on the channel. Many more fascinating narratives are waiting for you. And tell us in the comments, which myth or legend would you like to see in the next video?